Logan, welcome to #Education Day.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So, Logan, the first thing I wanted to ask you is could you tell us, listen, you're from TED Ed, from TED. I am the most enormous fan and feel very privileged to have done some talks for you. But I want you to tell us first, before we get into TED Ed, I'd love you to tell us about yourself and your journey.
Well, thank you. And that's I really appreciate that coming from someone who's had such an incredible journey, highlighting awareness for a need for a day of peace. And thank you for turning it into a need for a day of education. Um, my journey is very much centered in education. My parents were teachers. My grandparents were all teachers. I was a high school special education teacher in Athens, Georgia, where I grew up in the United States. And the only reason I left the classroom was because I happened to be in position with a dear friend to direct a feature-length nonprofit documentary about that friend. His name was Darius Weems. He was born with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and his brother, who was born with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, asked me to look out for Darius, his younger brother, before Mario, the older brother, passed away. And I had known Mario my whole life and I had started getting to know Darius at a camp for kids with disabilities that I worked at in the summers. And I was more than happy to sort of be a, big brother, a mentor figure in his life. Long story short, Darius and I, after many years of hanging out, were sitting around watching a show on MTV called Pimp My Ride. I don't know if you remember that show. And we had long had this dream to take Darius, who used a wheelchair at the time, on a trip outside of Athens, Georgia, where we lived. And we were watching the end of the Pimp My Ride credits, which is a show where they customize cars. And it said, in order to get your ride customized, you need to be in the greater Los Angeles area. And so here we are over on the East Coast of the United States. And this show that we love watching says we need to be on the West Coast if we want to get our ride customized. And so Darius and I came up with the idea to try and get his wheelchair customized on the hit show MTV's Pimp My Ride. And this does relate to TED, I promise. We traveled across the country, tried to raise awareness and funds for his disease, Duchenne muscular dystrophy. We tried to raise awareness for wheelchair accessibility across the country. We put it to the test. And of course, we tried to get his wheelchair customized on Pimp My Ride. That nonprofit film had quite a bit of success. We were able to win a lot of film festival awards. We were on the Ellen Show. We were on ABC's Nightline. And somewhere along the line, we actually both got TED fellowships. And so that's how I got involved with TED. And when you're a TED fellow, you get to go to the conference and you get to pitch an idea. And so based on my love of education, having been a teacher, and my love of filmmaking, having been a filmmaker, I pitched something called TED Ed. And Ted and Chris Anderson, the head of TED, said, good idea, let's do it. And so it was me on board as a team of one. And now I'm a team of 20 plus amazing people. And I'd love to tell you more about what we do at TED Ed.
Oh, Logan, it's such a great story. And can people watch that film, by the way, if they want to? Where is it? How can they see that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, it was locked on Netflix for several years, but I'm pleased to report it is now freely available on YouTube. And so you can search Darius Goes West on YouTube or go to dariusgoeswest.org.
Awesome.
Hey,
Well,
and actually, thanks for the opportunity to add one more thing. Because Darius is such an important person and such a key member of the TED community, I always want to tell this part of his story. And in fact, I've actually given a TED talk at the TED Fellows section of the conference saying the longer version of this, and apologize if I get emotional because he's such a dear friend. Darius has since passed away. Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a 100% fatal disease. So he knew that that was the case. But he used his entire life and his mission to raise funds and awareness for the noble causes I just mentioned. And 2 weeks before he died, he learned that the money he donated to Duchenne muscular dystrophy research ended up being seed funding for the first FDA-approved treatment for Duchenne muscular dystrophy in history. So his life, his 300,000 plus miles traveled by road, his TED fellowship, his ideas inspired and extended the lives of future generations who are born with the same disease he has. And so I just want to, honor that incredible accomplishment and my buddy, Darius Weems.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you did, and I hope that everyone goes to YouTube to see that film. Incredible, Logan. What a beautiful story, mate. So I want to ask you now, please tell us about TED Ed.
Yeah, so like I said, as an extension of my fellowship, I got to pitch TED Ed, and Chris invited me onto the TED team to found it. This was in 2011. It was just me for a year, and my job description was very simple: listen to teachers and students. So I had this idea of what TED Ed could be and should be, but of course my real job is to go and make sure that actually matches the expectations and needs of students and teachers around the world. Students and teachers were using TED Talks in their classroom, and some of the feedback was they're wonderful. We love them, make more of them, but maybe they're a little long relative to the expectations we have with a homework assignment. Streaming's barely available at this time, by the way, and ubiquitous. Maybe they're a little long relative to the class size. Maybe they're a little advanced relative to the level of school that I teach. So basically, we identified that TED content, though useful, was not really optimized for the education use case. So we said, okay, how do we optimize it? So the first thing we did is we actually tagged all of TED content to subjects that teachers teach and levels that might be most appropriate to teach it. So, using this information science, which was really blooming back in 2011, to tag and create a taxonomy for the TED Talks to make them more discoverable by teachers. With our other hand, we invented what is now actually not TED's most famous content. That will always be the TED Talk, yours included, but actually TED's most engaging format, as in it is experiencing the most amount of views, the most amount of watch time, the most amount of shares, and that is called the TED Ed animation. So what we realize is that experts around the world, that there are so many amazing experts, including educators around the world, maybe not all of them want to or should or could give a TED Talk. And a TED Talk is a very finite stage and a very finite space. Again, we should keep giving TED Talks, but isn't there a distributed opportunity to collect wisdom, insights, best lessons from educators everywhere without the need to actually stage a conference and deliver a talk to a room? So with a grant from YouTube, thank you, we actually got to explore that question, and we felt our way along and tested our way to what is now, like I said, TED's most engaging format, which is the TED Ed animation. Each one features an expert educator delivering, they actually write their best lesson. We then pair that writing, after working with them to go back and forth to optimize it for animation, with a professional voice actor. We get to work with amazing voice actors from all over the world, and a professional visualization artist. We work with hundreds of different animation studios, music composers. We also use sound effects artists. Several of the animations we've created, which cover all topics, by the way, have won film festival awards. One of them had major Oscar buzz. So when I say we're making animations for young people, I mean we're making the most high quality, tributes to knowledge and wisdom and science and poetry and all the subjects that curious people care to learn about that we possibly can. And we're sharing them for free with the world. We've created 1,600 to date. Each one takes us 6 months to make, but we publish 3 a week. So that means we have several in production at any given time. Those 1,600 TED Ed animations have been viewed by learners over 5.4 billion times to date. It's perhaps the most popular educational content format out there. And trust me, there are a lot of amazing educational channels. And I can say that because another thing that we do is we have a website that allows teachers to not just use TED Talks and TED Ed videos in their classes, but actually to curate anyone's videos from YouTube and to attach remixable, customizable lesson plans to those videos as a formative evaluation tool for students. That website has won 11 Webby Awards to date, and it's totally free, and it has over 1 million registered educators. And if neither of those are the way to get involved with TED Ed, the last 2 things, which I'll say very quickly, are an incredible student talks program that's designed to help students learn presentation literacy and guide them through identifying, developing, and sharing their ideas in the form of a TED-style talk. And then a comparable program for educators, in which we provide a professional development program where we guide educators through identifying, developing, and sharing their insights with other educators and the world through TED's channels.
It's just absolutely incredible, isn't it? I mean, congratulations. Wow. I mean, all of those things happening because of a TED talk that you gave to Chris, and I mean, it's just extraordinary. Congratulations, well done to you, and of course to the amazing team that are all around you.
That's what I was going to say. I think the coolest part of my job is the amazing people I get to work with and how much creativity, both internally and externally, gets gifted to TED Ed. And our job is just to reflect it back and amplify it as best we can.
It's inspirational. I feel very honoured that we are able to tell your story, Logan, on the International Day of Education for #Education Day. And that brings me on nicely to say, why did you want to support today, the Day of Education, and raise awareness of it?
Well, I'm extremely passionate about education. I mentioned earlier my background and my family's background. My background as a teacher and my family's background as teachers. But I mean, in a more general sense, I think that education is kind of the most important institution and process and value, universal value in the world. I mean, there are some others that you could mention, and I believe you work on all of them, including, peace and justice uh, and other important ideals. But education and the right to it and our natural state of wanting to learn is something that's not only that makes life feel worth living at its hardest moments, right? Like when we talk about cut this funding or protect this thing or do this thing. It's because life, when you're learning, is so deeply enjoyable. It's so satisfying to be engaged in education, is to be active minded, is to be opening opportunities in front of you, and is to be the opposite of apathetic, to be the opposite of languishing. You can't be pursuing something you're curious about and languishing and apathetic at the same time. It's a zero-sum game. One does not fit with the other. And so to synchronize on a day where everyone engages in caring for or fostering education, to me, is one of the most motivating concepts I can possibly think of.
Incredible. I completely agree with you. That's great. Okay, so look, the last question I wanted to ask you is, what role, Logan, do you think education can and should play in relation to the manifestation of a more peaceful and sustainable world? I mean, you and I know, we all know, that we've got to give the tools to young people to inform, inspire, and engage them to being the kind of driving force behind the vision of a united and sustainable world. We need to give them those new tools. It's a different world, isn't it, to the one where we were educated 30, 40, whatever years ago with climate and violence and these issues. So I want to ask you, how important is education going to play, do you think, in giving the right tools to young people to resolve the big issues that we face?
That's a deep question, and I really appreciate it. Um, I mean, to how important is the role? I think it's critical. It's necessary. It's probably not sufficient, right? Like if there were only education, I don't think we would have peace. There's other work to do, but if there weren't education, we would not have peace. So it is critical. And just to elaborate on that, I think that most violence, so the opposite of peace, be it war or some other form of violence, likely stems most often from some injustice that occurred further upstream, some trauma, some circumstance that made it possible for someone to resort to violence. Which is not to say people aren't responsible for themselves. You are, everyone is. But my point is, when we're considering education at a global scale, if you could wave a wand and have people have equal access and have people uh, engage in reading and writing. Just visioning that for a second, you can feel empathy rise uh, in whatever you're envisioning. And as that empathy rises, which is instilled by free and fair access to education and placing it as a central value in any culture for everyone, as that empathy rises, you start to feel peace come with it, right? And so I just think that informed people claim their own voices as opposed to having their voices claimed for them. And when you claim your own voices, you feel meaning, you feel purpose, and you respect other people's purpose and meaning as well. And you might not always agree, and there is always going to be argument. But I think an educated world trends towards diplomacy when there are differences, and an uneducated world trends towards violence when there is not. And so I choose to advocate for the former, and I appreciate that you and anyone watching this does too.
Beautiful answer. Wow, amazing. Absolutely spot on. Okay, sadly, that's the end of our interview. But before we go, one last thing. To anybody out there, to a teacher, to a parent, to a young person watching who'd like to find out more about TED Ed, where should they go?
Thanks so much for asking that, and thanks so much for this interview. The short answer is you can find all those TED Ed animations on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TEDEd. If you're a teacher, I encourage you to go to our educational platform that you can use to teach with video in your classrooms. It's entirely free. It's at ed.ted.com. And if you are a parent, student, or teacher, which I think is kind of, or a learner, I'll throw a learner in there so that it covers everyone because we're all learners. That we're constantly launching new initiatives and new programs, including the Student Talks program, including the Educator Talks program that I mentioned earlier. So I just invite you to, if you're curious, subscribe to us on any of the channels we are, just search TED Ed, you'll find us. And there's probably something for you.
Of course there is. There's always something for everyone at TED, right? Incredible. Good luck on your journey, Logan.
Thank you so much.